So we're looking at the city in history. This is part of our Creative Spirit Bread and Circuses course. This is an NSP core course. And as an interdisciplinary course, we're looking at history as one of our methods of inquiry. The history of civilization is intimately connected to the history of the city. History of the city also important for the history of civilization. Urban, the word urban comes from the Latin urbs, the word city from the Latin civitas. So you can see that the ancient origins even of our language relate to the ancient origins of the city. So the city is a place, but I would suggest it's also a concept. So the city, a place and an idea. The city is place. It's a center perhaps in a community of farmers, we might suggest, for the ancient world. Most people in antiquity make their way by farming, living off the land, but they do come together on occasion, even though they may be working hard most of the week, most of the month, most of the season. They do try to get together as a community, working in some fashion to achieve goals. So the city center can prove to be a place to pool resources, human labor, other resources. Here we gather people for worship, for defense, for labor, for trade, for leisure, for problem solving. So you might get together for fun, you might get together to solve an issue, you might get together because a threat is perceived. Few live in the city year-round. The exceptions are people like craftsmen, temple workers, tradesmen, folks that you need to go to get their services. It's much more convenient for you as a community to have them located in one place. The city as an idea. Community is important to the human condition. I'm outside right now in my neighborhood recording this, so you're going to hear some street sounds, maybe some dogs. It's because being indoors all the time, working alone indoors all the time, if you will, is not nearly as pleasant as enjoying the community in which you live. Aristotle noted we are political animals. We enjoy each other's company. We like to see other people. We like to engage with them. It's part of what makes us happy. As farmers in antiquity, we work in kinship groups. So we do work in some community, but it might be smaller, like the family, even the extended family. The city center allows for connections between and among kinship groups to be strengthened. So you might work with your family on your particular farm. You may even work with an extended family, more than one generation on your farm, but your family is larger than that. And so one of the things the city does allow is for great extended families to get together. In some cases, in Athens and Rome in particular, the connection to the city can become as great, perhaps even greater, than the connection to the kinship group. I think you can see where we're headed with this. Over time, we're going to see that even though family is important to people, it's still important to people. When you say travel abroad and someone says, "Where are you from?" Today, you don't typically say, "I'm from the Smiths in Ohio." You say instead, "Well, I'm from Athens, Ohio," or "I'm from Detroit, Michigan," or Wichita, Kansas, right? You don't typically say, I'm from the family farm Stevens in Pennsylvania, right? So we typically associate ourselves with an urban center even today. The root for the word city is closely connected to the same word and concept of citizenship and citizen. We've been talking about the origin of the city as a place and an idea, and this goes back to the ancient world, as we've said. The city of Damascus in modern-day Syria lays claim to being the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. So cities have come and gone, and they may actually predate 9000 BC as an entity, but Damascus holds the title, if you will, for being a city that has been inhabited without a break for now over 11,000 years. Athens is also a city founded approximately 5000 BC. Rome, founded traditionally in 753 BC, but probably inhabited before that. So both Athens and Rome certainly around for a very long time as well. London, founded by the Romans in AD 43, is one of those civilizations that has only been around as a city for 2,000 years or so. Sorry, that's my neighbor's squeaky transmission. The cities we're going to be going to in this class, been around a while. This map is pretty decent. I like it. Here's Mesopotamia. Suggested that this region here, often called the Fertile Crescent, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, is home to some of the oldest cities in the world. Damascus here, not on this map, sorry, somewhere about in there. Athens here in Greece we'll go to. Rome here in Italy we'll go to. And then London up here in Britain. We'll certainly come over to the continent of North America as well. But these are some of the ancient cities we'll be visiting in this class. Speaking of North America, this is a beautiful image of the Taos Pueblo in northern New Mexico. In the continental U.S., the pueblos of Acoma and Taos are the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in the U.S., founded probably somewhere around 1075 A.D. They're not technically cities. They're not large enough. They're not the kinds of cities that they don't meet all the requirements of a city that we'll get to. Still inhabited settlements. St. Augustine in Florida, founded in 1565, is the oldest and continuously inhabited city in North America, in the U.S. So, what is a city? How is it connected to civilization? Urban living is part of the recipe of what it takes to make a civilization. Civilization has many ingredients, and we're going to go through a list of them. This is not the only list that makes a civilization, but it's a pretty decent one. So let's take a look. First off, as we've already suggested, farming, agriculture, animal husbandry, that folks need to be able to feed themselves and feed their community. So agriculture, and not only the resources it provides for a given family, but also the abundance, the excess. We see it all the time when you travel in Kansas. You know, one Kansas farmer feeds himself and 27 other people. The same in antiquity, that agriculture supports a larger community than just the people producing the food. Political authority. A civilization and a city have to have a recognized political authority. Now, this might be a king, this might be a town council, this might be a group of elders. It sort of depends on the city, and it depends on the culture and many things. So a recognized political authority. Historians want to see writing. Historians want to see that people are keeping records. And so writing is important. People are keeping records to chart important things within the city, whether it's religious events, rainfall, trade encounters, treaties, laws, anything that helps us to recognize a political authority and other elements of that civilization. Ancient civilizations and cities have religious institutions. We see this everywhere. There's not an ancient city or even a modern city today that doesn't have some kind of religious identity. Monumental architecture. Monumental architecture. We often think of the pyramids. In Mesopotamia, we'll see a ziggurat. It's a pyramid shape, if you will. Think about your own hometown and some of the larger buildings. Sometimes these are associated with business, with economics. Sometimes they're associated with religion. The monumental building of Europe are the great cathedrals that you associate with the major cities of Europe. Cultural expressions in art and other media. A monumental building can be a cultural expression. Architecture can reflect a certain artistic style. There are other elements as well, cultural expressions. This can be literature. This can be statuary, painting. Material complexity, another element to our list. Some people have difficulty with this one, but ultimately what we're talking about is the ability to work the materials in your world in a complex fashion. So this can be metallurgy, the ability to work metal. This can be mathematics, being able to solve a complex problem such that you might need to bridge a river. You might need to use that river for irrigation. What's your plan? How will you endeavor to succeed there? So, material complexity. Military institutions. I often wonder, in the history of civilization, when does the desire to put together a military happen? Right? At what point? And that's always a very interesting question. But every civilization that we look at has some kind of military organization, whether it's defense from the outside world that comes into your civilization, or maintaining order within your civilization. In some cases, it's even associated with territorial expansion. Social hierarchy. This can sometimes be defined by wealth or power. Almost all civilizations we'll go to, almost all cities have some kind of social hierarchy. It might be associated with political power, it might be associated with gender, it might be associated with the work that you do for your community, right? Depending upon what that community values might determine what your social rank is. And then finally, urban living, living in a community, having a center, a physical city center, and this concept that somehow we belong to it. All of these are elements of civilization. Now, I suggested we would take some examples, and from our map, I pointed out Mesopotamia, ancient Iraq. And some of you may be familiar with this region. We won't spend much time in this class in this area, but it's difficult to talk about the history of cities and the history of civilization and not mention Mesopotamia. It is considered the oldest. And some of the elements I would point out from Mesopotamia in our recipe for civilization is that we think agriculture began in this region, organized, people coming together, organizing for the sake of producing food. Rather than hunting and gathering, now we're settled and we're making it. Here it is. Political authority. We can see political authority in Mesopotamia through written documentation. We have Hammurabi's Code, the law code, created by a king of Babylon, one of the city-states in Mesopotamia. He spread his influence throughout the valley and captured, recorded the law code for all these city-states. Again, some of you may have seen that. Writing and culture. We have one of the earliest epics in human history coming out of Mesopotamia, this idea of storytelling. The Epic of Gilgamesh answers lots of questions for the Mesopotamians. What's the nature of the gods? What happens to us after we die? It also offers great adventures. The character of Gilgamesh goes on great adventures. He's a great king. So, the Epic of Gilgamesh. So for Mesopotamia, agriculture, political authority, writing. We have some images here for you. To your left, you have the Code of Hammurabi written on a black stone. It's made out of diorite, a pillar. We think that one was set up in every city-state associated with Hammurabi. To the left, you have Hammurabi as king receiving the law code from the god Shamash. So you get both a religious and a legal authority here in this document. Below the seated figure is the law code. There are 282 laws written in cuneiform, the language of Mesopotamia. To your right, you have a restored effort at a ziggurat. You might be able to see the mud brick, you might be able to see the multiple layers there. The top looks a little bit eroded, and it is. So that part has not yet been restored. But we think the ziggurats, again, terrific examples of city centers taking lots of labor to pull this off, right? Lots of human labor to put that together. And this is an image of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is our king. Gilgamesh is a great hero. And this image in art showing that Gilgamesh can overcome lions. He's got a lion there that he's wrestling. But it also gives you some idea of the kind of cultural, artistic expressions that you're going to see in Mesopotamia. And when you look at this kind of art, if you're a student of history, you immediately can identify it with Mesopotamian culture. Whether it's the beard, the eyes, the aspect here of the feet, the way the feet are sort of turned like you might associate with Egyptian art. Again, not Egyptian, but that kind of technique is very similar for Mesopotamian and Egyptian art. So as we're going through our recipe for civilization, we come to Mesopotamia, one of the first civilizations on the planet, and a civilization made up of cities, city-states, where each city is independent and on its own. And one of the things that we were talking about in our slideshow is this idea of political power, that a civilization and a city has to have a defined political power. From Mesopotamia, we get the example of the Epic of Gilgamesh. One of the first great heroic literary works written in cuneiform, so the language of Mesopotamia, and it is the story of a great king. He is the king of the city-state of Uruk, the biblical Erech, you may have heard of. He is a great defender. He's a great builder of walls. He is a great provider. He has terrific adventures in which he slays lions, monsters. So he is considered in the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh to be a great king. Now, there are problems with him. When he gets bored, when there are no enemies to fight, when there are no monsters to slay, he can get bored. He starts to drink. He starts to brawl. He tears up the town. He also breaks up weddings. He steals brides. This is an example of a bad king. So the town councilors of Uruk get together and make a decision. This is another indication of the kind of power that can be in cities. Town councilors, the leading men, get together and decide that they must get in touch with the gods, who also meet in councils, by the way. So it seems that the city models the behavior that the people expect the gods also engage in. Yeah. So the town councilors get together, make a decision, and appeal to a council of the gods. Say, we like Gilgamesh when he is being good. We like him as a king. However, sound effects. However, when he is bored, he's impossible. Please help us. So the gods send to the town councilors of Uruk a plan. We will bring him a friend, a challenger, a man who is as strong as he, who will keep him busy. And they at first come together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu is his name, come together and they're wary of each other and they fight. But after that, they are fast friends. They go on adventures. They bring back resources for the city. They're amazing. So instead of having one great king who gets bored, we now have a great king who, when he's bored, goes off on adventures with his friend. So the town councilors get together and make this happen. So the Epic of Gilgamesh gives us just one little example of what political power in a city ought to be. In this case, it's a king, but he must be a good king. And when things go afoul of what is good, the leading people of the town councilors, get together to make a change. So, the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the examples we have to help us to understand the history of the city and political power. To add to that, we have a more modern image. Well, more modern, this is more medieval, but it's also from the area of Iraq, also from the area of Iraq, and this is the Great Mosque of Samarra. You can see that same mud brick construction. You can see that same idea of making something tall, almost like a pyramid shape, but this is more conical, more like a cone. This is more also associated with some of the ideas of Islam and this business of a journey going all the way up to the top. So very interesting image. Moving on to some of our other city-states and some of our other cultures and some of the other ingredients for our civilization, we'll be looking at various city-states in Greece. We'll be looking at Eretria from some of your readings. We'll be looking at Olympia from some of your readings. We'll also be looking at the city-state of Athens. We said that a city-state or an ancient city and civilization ought to have some religious elements. The readings that you have on Eretria talk about a parade, a procession, a community event celebrating the goddess Artemis. We also have selections celebrating the Olympic Games in Olympia and places around Olympia. We also have examples from Athens of monumental building, the Parthenon, certainly one of those, and examples of cultural expressions, the theater of Dionysus. You'll be reading Euripides' Antigone. So here we have the Parthenon. Atop the Acropolis is another building next to the Parthenon. This is the Erechtheion, and it's worth noting this because of the beautiful sculpture that we have just for columns holding up the building. Right? These are often called caryatids. These are maidens who hold up this one porch on this one building that is associated with the founder of Athens, Erechtheus. And here, the Theater of Dionysus. You have to imagine yourself as a theater goer sitting in one of these stone seats. The seats that have backs, by the way, are for the higher ups in society. So in the theater, you actually have social distinctions. So those are on here, the front row. If I can get my image, there you go. These have backs, and these would be for religious leaders and others. Also, these have backs as well. Otherwise, the rest of us would be up here in the seats that have no backs. The rest of us who are more common, if you will. We'll be also going to Rome. And when we get to Rome, we'll be talking about things like, at least for me, in Roman civilization, material complexity is a real big feature of that world. You can see it in the roads that they build, the aqueducts that they build, these elements that require significant engineering and also provide basic infrastructure for the city. The Romans very much interested in bringing clean water to the cities and getting rid of not so clean water. So for the Romans, a very healthful lifestyle in the city included good, clean running water to support the population and then sewage systems to remove wastewater. Also with Rome, we get an excellent example of military institutions at work. The Roman army brought in the resources necessary to support the city of Rome and the Italian peninsula as a whole, but it also helped to form the sort of cultural outlook of the Romans. Romans are a very militaristic society. I think we'll see that as we move along. Social hierarchy. Roman society supported both social classes and social mobility. So you might find yourself born into a particular class in Rome, but the Romans believed that merit was important and that one ought to be able to move up politically, socially, economically. Even slaves could buy their freedom and then go on to be very powerful people in Roman society. The gladiator games, I think, are an excellent example of both the militaristic and social elements of Rome. The Colosseum, an excellent example of their material complexity. Here you have a modern model of what the city of Rome may have looked like in the 3rd century AD. Here you have the Colosseum, pretty easy to see that marvel. And then here you have the Circus Maximus, again, another venue for public events. If you've seen the film The Hunger Games, the great plaza that the competitors come into, especially on the Catching Fire film, is absolutely a knockoff of this particular venue. Aqueducts. These aqueducts are actually not in Rome themselves, but these are in France. Everywhere the Romans went, they took a lot of their culture and their technology. And these aqueducts, again, very impressive in the use of arches and pipes to bring water from one region to another. The technology relied a lot on gravity. And then a bird's eye view of the Colosseum, at least what remains of it. So as we're moving ourselves out of antiquity and into the more modern era, let's just remind ourselves of some of these elements that we've been talking about. All of these things are required for an ancient civilization, but also we'll see them in ancient cities. Agriculture, writing, monumental building, material complexity, some kind of social hierarchy, a recognizable political authority, religious institutions, cultural expressions, and military institutions, all combined in a particular place or space. And all of these elements giving some kind of identity to that urban center. We're going to get to London in class at some point. We're going to get to see that great city. We said before it was founded in antiquity by the Romans in the 1st century AD. And when I think of London, I think of the River Thames as a central location in that city. I also think of its bridges, the multiple bridges across the river. Shakespeare and his theater scene readily come to mind and will be important for our discussion. The English love gardens, they love parks. And so in the city, they will always carve out spaces for that, and they're beautiful parks, beautiful gardens. Museums. Certainly something that shows up in the modern era, but not strange to antiquity either. Museums are, again, the word museum means the house of the muses. So it is a place, if you will, where you can bring together cultural expressions, you can preserve them, preserve historical issues. London, in particular, has lots of extraordinary museums. This map is a terrific map of London in the time of Shakespeare. And so here we have down at the bottom the Globe Theatre, the Rose, also a theater, the Hope, the Swan. And so you see all of these places that are clearly important to London cultural ideas. It is important to know that they are south of the River Thames, and that here, in this area, north of the River Thames, is the city proper. There were some legal reasons for that that we'll get into. But here's this London Bridge. Never too far from the city center is all of this entertainment. This is Kew Garden in London. And the reason I bring this up to you is because, first off, again, reminding us of public space in cities, but also the glass sculpture you see here is done by Dale Chihuly, an American artist. If you go to the Wichita Art Museum, you will see a sculpture by him as well. Taking art outdoors, combining the one expression of the garden with another expression of sculpture. New York, coming closer to our own home. New York, when I think of New York, I think of an economic center, a center for trade, certainly a center for cultural exchange, where you see people from all over the world coming to New York and its great port. And of course, New York, for our purposes, is a center for theater and music, a theater for a center for amazing innovations in theater, sometimes successful, sometimes not so much. If you're a member of the Newman Troubadours, you may have had the opportunity to perform at Carnegie Hall, because on occasion we are invited to do so. So a very interesting place for theater, music, and culture. Lots of public space in New York set aside to ensure quality of living. Again, broad sidewalks. This is an urban area. This is a walking city. Great parks, just as in England, in London. Our monumental building, great art and architecture, and this iconic image of the New York skyline, this iconic image of Statue of Liberty, a gift from the French to the Americans, symbolic for the city of New York, but also symbolic for the country as a whole. Times Square, center of arts, center of tourism, also center of commerce, as you can see, for Bank of America and McDonald's. New Orleans. We'll get to New Orleans in this class because we'll be reading Mary Ryan's story of the parade, her essay on the parade. We'll get to New York because of that same reason and other issues. But New Orleans, a great port again for trade and exchange of goods and culture. Monumental building in New Orleans for its churches, but also the Superdome, great venue for professional sports and other issues. Extraordinary culture expressed in music and in food. This is Jackson Square, the great cathedral there in the middle of town. Spared by the Hurricane Katrina because the French Quarter, you may know, the center of town, is higher ground. Finally, we'll get to San Francisco in this class, and again, if only for a little while, for, again, Mary Ryan's article on the parade. But again, San Francisco, you think of agriculture, but this time maybe a little more specialized agriculture, wine. Economics, trading depot. Here, another great port city. Levi Strauss got his start in San Francisco because he was very near the gold rush, which is just a little bit south of San Francisco, but certainly in that area. So we think of those kinds of things. Also, San Francisco is a gateway to the Pacific Rim we talk about. The west coast of this country, very intimately connected to things Asian, both in immigration, but also in trade, communication, banking, etc. Also, I think of material culture when I think of San Francisco. Again, great bridges, but also in this city in particular, among a lot of cities in California, we've really got to engineer for earthquakes. Just as the Statue of Liberty is iconic for New York, the bridge, the Bay Bridge, is iconic for San Francisco. So your monumental architecture can also be utilitarian. Wichita. What do you think of when you think of Wichita? How does Wichita connect to the idea of the history of the city and culture, city and the arts, the history of civilization? Economically, I think of Wichita as a cattle town, intimately connected to farming in Kansas and here on the Great Plains. It's also, of course, connected to aircraft industry, to manufacturing of airplanes. We have a very impressive connection to the military here, in that we have the Air Force Base McConnell. This is a very religious town, very much a part of our culture. 30% of the population is Catholic. Better than 90% professes to be Christian. When I first moved here some 15 years ago, I was told there were more churches per capita in Wichita than any other community in the country. I was also told there was more theater per capita than any other community in the country. So we're very interesting in that regard. Cultural identity, or Wichita maintains its name, is connected, has tribal affiliation. But we're also connected, we're a community of immigration. Europeans, of course, coming out here when America moved west. Since then, we've had immigration from Latin America. We've had immigration from Asia. We are just experiencing, like many places, many cities in this country, an extraordinary cultural diversity. Again, we have great theater. We have large entertainment venues, particularly the Intrust Arena, the latest addition to our list of venues. We have professional sports, minor league perhaps, in both hockey and in baseball, but still something that we like to do as a community. And college sports are very big here, not to mention high school sports. As I'm recording this, the Wichita Festival is getting ready to gear up in a week or so. And I'm not trying to advertise it. I'm not saying you should go. In fact, it might be over by the time this class begins. But it's one of the iconic images of our society. Here's Botanica in Wichita. Again, a beautiful garden that we have, supported by public taxpayer monies. You still have to pay to get in it, I'm sorry to say. And then finally, this image of the Keeper of the Plains, 4th of July image. So connections to our course. Increasingly, the human condition is an urban condition. In the U.S., 82% of the population lives in cities. In the world, 52% lives in cities. In the beginning of time, for us, the beginning of civilization, this was not remotely the case. So over the course of the past millennia, past 5-6 millennia, people have increasingly moved towards the cities. We live in a time, particularly in the West, in which we have more leisure than ever before. When I say the West, I'm talking about the English-speaking world. I'm talking about European, American, Australian cultures, right? When I say American, we're talking Canada, Mexico, right? So we live in a time in which we have more leisure than ever before. We want our cities to be livable. We want them to enhance the quality of life for our families and our wider community. Economic resources, monumental buildings, city planning, other elements of urban living work together to create art and entertainment opportunities that can respond to the needs and the desires of the people living in cities. So now we're getting into some complexity here, right? How do we decide what those forms of art and entertainment will be for us? We have objectives for the creative spirit component of the NSP. How do we engage in the creative spirit? Where does human creativity come from? Do we create sidewalks along the river because we need access to the river, or do we create sidewalks along the river here in Wichita because we want to have nice areas to stroll? We want to be able to enjoy the river. How does the creative spirit connect and link us to each other? How does the creative spirit lead us toward transcendence? Where can we recognize expressions of our creative spirit? How has the creative spirit influenced various aspects of society? So how does our desire for entertainment venues, for museums, for sculpture on Douglas Street, how does our desire for that influence the development of it? And then once you have these kinds of venues, how does that then in turn shape us? So what connections can you make? Here you go. Here's your assignment. Take one element from that recipe for what it takes to make a civilization. One element. Take one objective from the Creative Spirit course. Find an example in your own home city or the city closest to you that speaks to both. Please post to the discussion board by the end of week 1. For example, and the discussion board is a blackboard. For example, in Wichita we have the monumental sculpture, the Keeper of the Plains. This cultural expression, part of our recipe, uses art to reflect community heritage, thereby connecting us as a community, one of our objectives for the course, offering a symbol that helps to identify who we are for ourselves and for others. So the Keeper of the Plains, a cultural expression, perhaps even monumental art or architecture, helps to reflect our community heritage, thereby connecting us as a community. So sorry, I took that one. You can't use it. So please, by the end of week 1, on the discussion board, and I'll probably call it Connections, please make your own posting.